Hello, and thank you for joining No Wrong Choices, the podcast that explores the career journeys of interesting and accomplished people in pursuit of great stories and actionable insights. I'm Larry Samuels, soon to be joined by my co-hosts Tushar Saxena and Larry Shea. But before we kick off, I have a very important request to make. Please support the work we're doing by following No Wrong Choices on your favorite podcast platform, such as Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, and by giving us a good review. We also ask that you connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and X, and by visiting our website at nowrongchoices.com, where you can learn more about us and the show while signing up to become a member of our community. Your support enables us to bring these great stories to light. Now let's get started. This episode is part 2 of our conversation with the foreign correspondent, journalist, and media strategist Courtney Kealy. We'll pick things up with Tushar asking Courtney about the role of foreign correspondents within the current media landscape.
Like all foreign news, it kind of fights for a space in the U.S. news landscape. What do you see as the fundamental role now, currently, of the foreign journalist? And do you think foreign journalism in general is still as obviously it's necessary, but is it as important, or is it seen as important in the U.S. landscape as it once was?
Well, a lot of the reason I was living overseas was that even though foreign correspondent was seen as valuable, it wasn't seen as something you could make your career on it. There were only a couple of seats at a couple spots. And even then, they weren't going nearly as in-depth as I was. So living overseas and like really inhaling the dirt and rolling around in it, I kind of feel like you have to do. There's now a trend like you don't understand the story unless you're Jewish or Muslim, or unless your family is from these places. And I'm more than I'm all about that perspective too, because I think people were way too sidelined, and it was way, and now we need to open that up for all the nuances that brings as well. I was trying to do it through my reporting, but every person is limited. So right. I think we've made great strides in inclusivity and people being able to tell their story from where they are, not parachuting somebody in. But I think there's real value to people that have developed a certain amount of skills that help them literally navigate the maps, navigate the towns, navigate the people in a way where maybe you can go home and not be scared that your family is going to get killed. And also not do that to the fixer, the people you're interviewing. You always have to be very, very careful with that. So I don't like the mothership. I like certain bosses. I don't like all bosses. If you give me a job to do and I just can do the job, that's great for me. If I can have some sense of community, so I'm not lonely and sad, that would be great. Some sense of a private life, because we all need that, or we'll go insane. Great. It's like, again, like really the basics of like what an office community or what a small town community would be, or where do you find your public and your private? Where do you find your recreation? And then a lot of it was also not wanting to be a casualty, but also learning as we developed what the pitfalls were. And, I started a career that was all about hazing. If you're tough enough, like, let's go to, it's sort of like going to, not hazing in some horrific way, but like, are you tough enough? Can you do this? But there can be a problem of if you become manufactured on-air talent in America, you might not have become a journalist first.
Right.
And I like the people that become journalists first and then figure out their voice and what they want to say on TV or in radio.
You certainly did that, meaning cutting your chops as a journalist first. How long would you stay overseas? I feel like you have to be on edge to a point, like where you need breaks and you need to decompress a little bit. How long would you stay in country at any given stretch?
We used to say 3 months in Beirut, you need to get out. Often I would get on an assignment, like to go home, like, it was lean and mean for several years. So it would be like once a year I get to the States. Month, 2 weeks, 1 week, like, and I had all these little, I was like the queen of the hustle before the hustle, or the continuation of the hustle. Like, I photographed weddings when I was and babysat to get through graduate school. So when a friend would get married, I'd like photograph their wedding for a plane ticket, or I'd just go to photograph their wedding. And so I still like photograph my friends' weddings in the middle of from home from work.
So you can work that in. When you're overseas, is there a social life? Like what type of life are you creating for yourself, if any, other than the job when you're overseas?
It is really, really fun because you feel totally righteous about working hard and playing hard. And you feel like the first time in your life, like maybe you didn't want to hang out at the frat parties when you were young because they just seemed kind of dumb, even though we're like, yeah, we're all so crazy, we're in college. Well, try being crazy after you survive a suicide. With
a lot of people like you.
You feel tougher. Like you don't need to swallow goldfish just to prove a point. You're like, damn, that was crazy.
So how many years did you spend in country, so to speak?
Beirut, I lived in Beirut for 5 years, using that as a base. And that was up and coming. Remember, that was when they were rebuilding. That was when nightclubs were reopening, bars and restaurants, beach clubs. So you literally had a war, and you could scuba dive, and you could go back to a private beach club and watch all the women in bikinis and high heels peter around to Funky Town blaring. So it's quite. There was a lot of money coming in. This was before 2006, before the Israeli-Lebanon war. Tourism was starting. It was all rebirthing. It was very much Phoenix from the ashes, but it was more than that, because the Beirutis have always figured out in times of war they're incredibly intoxicating, seductive people. They're just like, let's dance on the table. Tomorrow we might not live. So you dance on that table.
When was it, or what? I mean, look, obviously your time overseas sounds so super exciting for many folks here, and obviously now you're back here in the States. So what was it that was, if you want to talk about it, what was it that finally was the driver to bring you back home?
The worst experience of my lifetime, something that I've been trying to get over ever since, and I think it's like a whole other lesson in grief and tragedy. My brother died of a massive heart attack while I was in a plane flying back to Jerusalem after I'd been home on my outs. His wife had terminal cancer. My nephews were 12 and 8. She had suffered and battled cancer for nearly 12 years. It was 2011. I was on my A game in Trafalgar Square in the deserts of Libya. I was home watching the rebels take over Tripoli, Gaddafi on the run. I figured that was where I was going to push my editors to send me next, really hard. I wanted to be on the way to Tripoli. I ended up in the suburbs. My deceased brother's house, laden with food and cups of joe and coffee, because my person in the world, my favorite person, my best friend, my everything, had died in the worst kind of way in front of his children. He was dying away.
And that obviously, you did the greatest thing ever. Is that, I know that after your brother passed, it wasn't that far after that your sister-in-law then passed as well, and you did the most heroic thing ever, which was then take care of their kids. I mean, I've read an article where you said you don't consider yourself their mom, obviously, because they had a great mom.
They have,
but you are just their caregiver. Yeah, right. Have a great mom.
Yeah.
Exactly. You're 100% correct.
They have a great mom and dad, and they got, they've lost the most, more than anybody else. I just walked into the house and I looked at my younger nephew, Declan, who's 8, and he said, "How long are you staying this time?" And I said, "I'm not leaving. I'm not going. I'm not getting a plane. I'm not leaving." And then, at Fox, they're like, "Okay, so when are you going back?" I said, "I'm not." And they're like, "Wait, what?" And I was like, once again, "Wait, what?" And I was like, "I'm not getting on a plane. My brother died of a heart attack while I was on a plane. Nobody in my family is going to be okay with me on a plane. And they're like, well, how are you going to get your stuff? And I was like, my friends somebody's taking my dog, they'll send it back, but my stuff will get sent back. And they're like, well, what about your job? And I was like, I'm sorry, but you guys are going to have to figure that one out. Like, there was nothing defiant in my tone. It was just like,
this is just where reality is right now.
Reality
Right.
just like, yeah, it's like a boom, just fell on my head. This is where we're at. We're not changing at all. And my sister-in-law is terminal, and there's no will, there's no life insurance. Everything happened in the way you look for the way you look for somebody to interview ticks all the boxes. I became the type of person that would tick all the boxes in terms of an American tragedy. So I was covering tragedy. I was in the funerals, covering the funerals. I was covering the disasters that befall people. I was covering wars. And then I had a total fucking disaster on my hands. And I was in the church. I was in the wake. I was in the funeral. I was holding my nephew back. I was tending to Harrison. I was watching my sister-in-law, who was not well, with it, and I was like, and it's really interesting because the first really overwhelming feelings for the first couple of years were total humiliation of being that needy. It was like all the things in America that people didn't talk about yet, healthcare, the recession that was more of a depression, took them out from this well-to-do suburb. She was the top real estate broker. The recession hit the bedroom communities of New York City hardest. She lost her real estate business, all that income coming in. My brother had switched to real estate to get back out of it into healthcare. The treatments and everything were piling up. The house went underwater because of the recession. Everything happened to them that was not their fault. And I was like, I'm not going to sit around and like wonder why this happened to me. I'm just going to try to dig us out of this mess. And I know my brother, and I know him. Like, we didn't have to talk. People used to call us the silent twins because sometimes we would just get really quiet, and other times we'd be like super rowdy. But I didn't like, nobody was going to. And this is like, beep it out, but nobody was going to get in the fucking way this time.
Totally
like,
get it.
Get the fuck out of here. You're either with me or you're getting the fuck out of my way. And there are kids at stake. And I don't give a shit what adults' problems are happening. I mean, I cared about my mom. I cared about my family. I cared about my sister-in-law and her friends. But it was protect those kids as much as you possibly can from any more harm that has already befallen them.
So now that you are back domestically reporting, how do you see the problems in the United States as compared to what you saw overseas? Is there a comparison at all?
We are much more naive in terms of recognizing what our real problems are. And sometimes when your problems are in front of you, it's easy to be distracted by the school. Squirrel. We are so distracted by so many things in our life that don't affect change, that be good for the greater good, the greater community and people. And I think we've come to a tipping point where we realize it's like left our country and our communities in tatters, and we're just learning how to try to tiptoe around it and regain our levels of communication, and even just speaking to people and like having a coffee and not talking about who you vote for.
Right.
Soft stepping to make sure that you're not in any way offending them. I mean, I'm in New York, so it's very, very hard to talk about the Hamas massacre or anything that's ensued since then. That's a new one. I hear Russian, and it's like, oh wow, after the invasion of Ukraine, you don't want to put Russians on the spot who are in the States. You don't want to put Ukrainians on the spot who are watching a war continue. You don't want to put Arabs on the spot for feeling under attack. You don't want to put Israelis or Jewish people who feel under attack too. You don't feel like enough has been paid, enough attention has been paid to the fact that was the worst massacre, the worst thing that's happened to them collectively as a people since the Holocaust. Like, that's a fact.
Right.
And so can you stop just like everything, like you said, arrows and bows and guns and everything coming at you. And it's like I covered the Middle East. it's coming back again. So my experience of like informing me of knowing Hamas, knowing Hezbollah, knowing the region, knowing Netanyahu. I know the players. I know what they've evolved into. I don't like any of them. But I also cover politics. I always say, like, I have a high disregard for all politicians. Like, if you're a journalist, you're not supposed to be invited to the dinner party. You're supposed to be the one not invited.
Totally.
Right?
You're not doing your job unless you're a little bit hated.
Yeah, you have to be hated. Like,
Totally.
Like, now we're kind of revile. But if you're walking around in Washington rubbing elbows, you're not doing your damn job. And so there were choices to be made, like, Jerusalem and Washington are places to have families until they weren't, and so I rode my family wave right into all of a sudden going from Fox to Al Jazeera America opened, in-depth journalism the way I wanted it, with an expertise in the Middle East and geopolitics. Sign me up. And that experiment was a great experiment with talented people, and then it was over, and we flooded the market to look for jobs, and then TRT, which is out of Istanbul, came calling in their English language out of Istanbul, and I'm like, am I going to be influenced by Erdogan? How am I going to live there? It was a big question mark. And put food on the table. I went back and forth and did some really incredible stories back into my old stomping grounds. And then I realized that I need to be back in the States for my nephews. They're college and boarding school at that point. I couldn't cross commute for more than 17 months from Istanbul. And so I got myself to Washington on the premise of, I know what crazy is. I've been at Saddam Hussein's death sentencing. I've been at Saddam Hussein's death sentencing. I've been at Yasser Arafat's funeral. I've been to Tahrir when they want Mubarak gone. I've been in the deserts of Libya with Gaddafi on the run. What do these all have in common? That every despot and dictator do fail eventually, maybe not on your own watch, right? Hafez al-Assad died on the watch. So why wouldn't Trump go down? So instead of coming in with, I know Washington, I know the people, we all worked on the Hill together when I was a young this or that, nope. I was like, I know what chaos is, and I know what crazy is, and I know what this town doesn't know. It's fucking crazy, and things are mad, and they're going to get worse. So when my pitch to those editors was, why should I be in Washington? Why should you transfer me back to an American contract? It's like, individual number one has now been named in the Conan, with Conan. The midterms with the Year of the Woman just came through. This was before Roe v. Wade came through. The Mueller report's going to come out. I need to be there. It's all going down, and it's going to go down, and it's going to go down in ways you never expected it. Because if you try to predict what's going to happen, if you're thinking of the Middle East, if you're thinking of the Trump administration, you haven't been properly briefed. So let's go into the unknown together.
Now, the unfortunate thing is that you've seen it all happen before, and you know what's coming down the pike.
What I didn't pitch for, I didn't pitch at COVID, I didn't pitch Black Lives Matter Plaza, and I didn't pitch an insurrection. But I pitched crazy.
I mentioned it at the top of the show that you were on the ground, you were in the Capitol, and you were on the ground on January 6th. Who were you working for, and can you tell us about that experience?
So after Al Jazeera America closed, TRT came calling, and I didn't think I'd ever go back overseas because I have my nephews, and I've told them I won't go anywhere. And 6 years from the day I walked in, nearly 6 full years from the day I walked into my brother's house after he just died, my nephew saying, "When are you leaving?" 6 years after that, the night before Harrison's high school graduation, Declan was on a boarding school schedule at the time. And I get a call from TRT World in Istanbul. Do you want to come here and work for us, work for a show? And you'll do in-depth 5-minute pieces. And so by the time, let's get back to the most important point, by the time we got to January, I was thoroughly spooked by what had happened. And I was so spooked that I told a friend of mine whose ex-husband is in government, and it was in the government, get your kids off social media. Do not let them say anywhere they are, like anywhere. And I asked her after the insurrection, do you think I was going a little crazy? And she said, yeah. I was trained by special forces, British Paris in Baghdad, and I absorbed it. Wasn't a lot of people resented having bodyguards and having to cover the U.S. military, but that became a beat almost of mine, especially working for Fox and American Network. It wasn't necessarily about black ops or injustices, or it became more of like troop movements and what does will the surge work, and who is going to betray us, and what is this coin, and they brought it to Afghanistan. Maybe it was too little too late, maybe it was just not enough to affect enough change. But here I am back in DC and saying I'll pick up my press passes to this bureau chief that I had that was like, just what do you want? And I was like, let me be in the Russell building the day that he's going to talk, this January 6th. So I and this is also like from all the experience of being alone and figuring stuff out with like Hussein, right, or the special forces. Like, I'm thoroughly absorbing, the hostile environment of driving down where there are T-walls and there are fences and they redirected traffic and everything's locked down. So there's a visual element that's completely comparable to the green zone of Baghdad. But then there's this total disconnect with reality, because I walk up to a Capitol policeman that day and say, that Monday, and I'm like, hey, what is your plan for when Trump gives a speech? I'm trying to decide if I should be inside or outside. He goes, it should be fine out here. I'm like, okay, but no, and then Juan, I say, I say I want Juan as the cameraman. He knows I walked all over the summer, I got on the subway underneath. I walked through empty COVID closed off tunnels all through the buildings. He knew his way around the tunnel, all the tunnels. And so I was like, I need Juan, who's covered the White House and government for 20 years, who knows all the ways around because he knows the tunnels. So I have a cameraman who knows the tunnels. I've decided to stay inside. He's found us the spot. I've checked the Capitol Police. He's like, it's going to be fine. I'm like, I don't know. It's going to be a long day. We're going to need our electricity. I'm going to need to be in this spot. And then I'm driving up in an Uber early so we get it the night before. We know he's from Chile. He makes friends with the Portuguese guy. They're going to watch our stuff. We'll be back at it first thing in the morning. And so we're set up and I'm in that morning. And so at this point, my partner is a political reporter. He's from Columbus, Ohio, not New York. He's from he knows flyover country. He's covered all the presidential elections. We're both journalists, but we complement each other in different ways. So I'd be like, this is happening. He's like, that's not going to happen. I'm like, it is. And it's like,
dude, this
America.
Is happening, right?
You're American to me.
Feels
right?
too familiar.
But it is. Oh, sorry. So, so I drive in. I remember seeing like one of those axe throwing games, but it's not a game. And there was a Biden and Pelosi, and you could throw axe at their faces, and that was there. And I was looking at all the cars. I was like, well, maybe they're have them parked by the tidal basins to get into Virginia quickly. Maybe this is how they're going to get the traffic out. Maybe they're going to redirect it this way. Maybe this is going to cut this way, and this is going to cut this way. And I get inside, and we start going live, and then it's midday, and I'm up live with with my earpiece in, right, like this, and they put Trump's speech into my ear so I can follow along live, and they can cut in and out to me anytime. And I'm listening to it, and then at the very end, he says, basically it says to people, let's go to the Capitol. And I text Jim, and I was like, he's coming here. And he's like, no, he can't do that. Well, yeah, we find out from Cassie Hutchinson that he tried to take the wheel, but all because he did try to take the wheel. He did try to drive up to the Capitol. And it felt like that. It was like, oh my God, it's coming. And then, and Juan was getting food, and I was like, Juan, come back, because there's only, you have to go down a tunnel to get a sandwich. And I was like, come back, it's not safe, it's not safe. And he swaggers up, and all of a sudden, his fear factor is that he starts swaggering like, he's like not scared at all. So he goes, I survived Pinochet. And I said, Juan, you want to survive this? Or do you want to be the sidebar? He survived Pinochet, but he didn't survive the insurrection at the Capitol. I was like, because that's going to be the effing headline, Juan. And he's like, tranquilo, Courtney. And I'm like, okay, fine. Call me a crazy lady, but like, I know my stuff. And so then I was rushed to the window to see if they were coming into the building. And then we went on lockdown, and it didn't come into that building. And I wasn't where the gunfire was. And, I was on lockdown. I went live for the rest of the day, covering everything as it broke. At first, I thought it was smaller people. At first, I thought it was a crowd that could be contained. They're saying it's not that many people. I know how to report large crowds. And I was like, it's not on this side. It's not on that side. But as we saw footage, as we heard from people right there, we realized what a absolute total disaster it was, how dangerous it turned, how much of a riot it turned into. A lot of people, I do really truly believe that a lot of people were there as supporters and were taking directions, but they were more like, oh, look where we got to. This is strange,
Right.
Whereas there were people that, the people were being warned about that did have the zip ties and the guns and were to try to take hostages and were maybe going to go after leaders, and Pelosi was in danger, and the vice president was in danger, and all those people were in danger. I don't think the average civilian had gone there to do bad. I don't, I'm not going to say that against Trump supporters or loyalists or people that really truly believed when he said the election was stolen that it was, despite the fact that it wasn't, because the facts speak for themselves. And so that's just sort of like that. The most dangerous stories are when the initial story happens, and it's like the first 24 hours for journalists where you could really get hurt. So then I walked. It's like, and then this crazy stuff happens. Like I was walking to finally go out around 8 o'clock at night, and there's these two guys that walk back past me as I'm walking up to one of the entrances. There's like this dim light. Yeah, I was walking out, and these two guys with like central casting detective raincoats walked past me. And I was like, where'd you get those? Like, and it looks like they're from a movie, like they have the collars and they're sort of like a beige, and they come to like mid-cab, and you used to see them on Cops out in Queens doing detective work. And like, they're just walking past me with this like crazy light. And because one room is down the hallway of the Russell building is on, all these lights are out. And I'm like, where did you guys come from? And then I walk outside, and it's all of the riot police, the street lamps hitting their helmets and their visors. And then past them is all the DC cops and fire engines. And then there's Union Station. And I'm like, am I getting an Uber? And still Juan, too, like, and he, to his credit, he was right. He's like, stop worrying, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. I was like, I don't know, So we're walking out together, and I order an Uber to see if I can get one. And I look down, it says, your driver Muhammad is on his way. And I was like, oh, alhamdulillah. If anyone knows how to get me out of a racist, dangerous spot, maybe Muhammad knows how to get out of one.
I was going to say, like, when you put in for your Uber, what did it say? That your wait time will be 7 hours?
That's what I was thinking, too.
35 years, because nobody of color is coming to this community to rescue you. Yeah. No, I was like, oh my God, Muhammad's coming. Oh, okay. I'm super comfortable in the Middle East, and I know how people had to deal with this, but this stuff, that's Washington crazy. Nah.
So what is it like, or have you ever taken a time? I don't assume that at certain points in your life and certain points even now in your career that you just take a step back and you say, I've seen history very quite literally up close and personal. What is that like?
It's wonderful. It's just wonderful. I mean, talk about not living with regret.
Right.
Right. I stepped up, I was like, My sister-in-law loved James Taylor. It took me more than a decade to even listen to James Taylor. I was driving back to DC and it popped up on my Spotify, and I thought, I'm going to listen to this song and see if I can take it. And it's that I've seen Fire and Rain, and I was like, well, so have I. So there's James Taylor. My nephew's an amazing musician. He's just starting what's going to be an incredible career. My younger nephew got caught up in COVID and he's 20. And so that generation needs all the help they can get. I'm still trying to decide how I'm going to use my knowledge base to affect some kind of change or do some kind of good coming out of what's happening now in the Middle East, in the region, in not just Gaza and not just Israel and not just the hostages, but everyone involved, which is everyone. It's the Syrians and it's the Yemenis and it's the Lebanese and it's the Iraqis and it's the Iranians and it's the militant groups and it's the innocent civilians and it's the collateral damage. It's so, it's what I've seen before. I've seen American bombs do terrible things before. And maybe I think this is another, like, for lack of a better word, call it like a heaving or a break with reality, but it's also an inflection point of we will look back at this time of when it all hit us again and how we all reacted again and figure out how do we pick ourselves up after that. I learned how to do that in the Middle East by people that constantly had to pick themselves up after terrible tragedy. And I learned it personally, how to do it. And now it's just a really good life skill.
What are your current views on where the industry as a whole stands right now?
We're a monopoly game. We're the pieces that are being sold and bartered and built on. Literally. Is Paramount sold today or tomorrow? No, it's not. CBS can live and breathe in its latest incarnation for the next 12 months, maybe.
Sure.
Where's ABC? What's happening at Murdoch? What happened after Fox took a different turn? What's happening at radio? Radio's not dead. Podcasting exists, but so what was AI going to do to everyone next? Like, I'm not scared of AI. It's a tool to use, just like the internet was as well. But you have to learn the tool to continue to use them. But they still come down to reading, writing, arithmetic. Like it always does. If you can't string a sentence together, you can't string a paragraph together. If you can't string a paragraph, you can't make a point. If you can't bring in information after that, so whether you're writing a school article, whether you're writing a newspaper article, whether you're telling a story in film, old-fashioned film, in digital, in a podcast, where's your beginning, middle, and end? Where's your narrative arc? And it comes back to life. It comes back to why I'm glad I took a long term through literature, and I understood that Plato's Republic, that poets were going to be inheriting the information to dispense it to the people because Plato didn't believe the people could deal with it unfiltered, and it needed to be packaged and put out there so they could digest it. And what now is it's just this fire hose of everything, and we need to figure out new ways to have great storytellers and truth-sayers and people that speak power to justice earn a living, take care of their children and their families and themselves, and do really hard work. And there's nothing to sustain people right now beyond you could find one perch and maybe stay under this banner of this news organization of this, I've worked for the Gray Lady. I've worked for Mickey Mouse. I've worked for Murdoch. I've worked for the Emir. And I've worked for Erdogan, right? If you're callous and you put it that way, it looks like I'm shilling for some pretty nasty people. ABC wasn't owned by Mickey Mouse when I first started. Murdoch wasn't a big player in the US. The Emir certainly wasn't a player. Qatar, people weren't going to Saudi for work as they are now. What's wrong with our economy that we can't stand up for human rights and not go to Saudi for work? We're all being driven to it. And then where do you find the ways where you're like, okay, I work for this organization, but it's the same work I've always done. And I'm going to look at who my audience is, and I'm going to serve them up truths the way I serve it every time. So my reporting hasn't changed. So now I just call them overlords, right? Because we're now at the big man behind the curtain with that microphone, as scared as you are, and news was never supposed to be a Wall Street commodity. It was not supposed to be arbitrage. It was not supposed to be hostile takeovers. It was not supposed to be this. And we have people, starting out up to their 80s that don't know how to write this, how to get it back on track. And so we all know it's storytelling. We know it's voice. We know it's integrity. We know it's ethics. And we know that there's a whole multimedia way to tell it. How are you going to pay your rent? How are you going to take care of your kids? And some of the choices are, I took care of my kids, my guys, my brother and his wife's, Sean and Kara's kids, by staying nearby. But when I stayed at home, like I left the Middle East to cover Newtown, to cover the Boston Marathon bombings, to cover the UN the day Sergei Lavrov was speaking, and we realized Russia really had some different ideas and did not care a toss while they were moving military bases into Syria, while they were being hosted at the UN GA, and he was speaking in real time. And those Russian military bases, which empowered the siege of Aleppo, which is when I helped people fundraise for military equipment in Ukraine, I knew that they targeted doctors because the Russian military helped the Syrian regime cover doctors. So the more you learn about war, and the more you learn about the tactics they use, the more you realize when they're going to use them other places. So where does this knowledge base come from? We know that Biden was going to fall back into a very old-fashioned perspective of pro-Israel. And at a time, those first few days were just horrific. And there's still hostages. Like, how do you thread that needle? Like, he was never good in the Middle East. I'm sorry. You're expecting a president to be able to deal with something that was never on his table, and he kept off his table for a reason until it crashed through the ceiling of his living room at the White House. So all of this is like, and people say, well, I'm not going to vote because I don't believe what he's done with the Palestinians are okay. Well, have you never heard that a second-term president actually has the wherewithal of not having to worry about re-election? That they can go and knock heads together in the Middle East as an American power broker, or not, or realize that we just are wrong, or maybe we are as righteous as we always have been in terms of the state of Israel. Like, choose your battles, but in the second term, you can actually speak as opposed to like swallowing your words because you're not worried about campaigning. So our country now, you go to election happens, before they even take power, the next cycle is beginning. You slow down the political process. And don't make journalism nonprofit. And don't put it on our shoulders to try to be business people. Because if we were business people, we'd have a house in the Hamptons right now and we'd never become journalists. I'm not an idiot. I grew up in New York. I've seen incredible wealth. If I could have, I didn't go out to accumulate that. I didn't, it was there. I said, no, I'm good. Like, I believe in something else. Other people went to Wall Street.
So with that in mind, if you were talking to the 23-year-old version of you right now, who has that fire, who has that desire, who wants to get into this field, how would you advise them to go forward, and how would you advise them to stand out and to really break
I have
through?
a really good math with this age, because I feel like I'm a Gen X, they're Gen Z, and everyone before us, after us, and between us can all fuck off. Like, that's how they feel, and that's how I feel. Like, come on, guys. Like I said to the boys, like, it's us. You got fucked over, we got fucked over. Have you seen Reality Bites? Got out of college in a recession.
Good reference, by the way.
Then whenever was buying their first house, there was a recession. I killed my brother, recession. Went to the Middle East, Well, I didn't go to Ukraine because I wasn't going to put myself into that situation for Harrison or Declan. And especially, I just knew that I know the way the Russians operate. I didn't want to be caught up. I didn't want to get killed. I didn't feel like it'd be healthy for my family to go, or for me. But I helped two young men that had crowdsourced. They were crowdsourcing $5,000 to give money to get phones or diapers at the border. They didn't know what to do next. They were roommates at Cornell. One was Ukrainian American, one was American. The one who's Ukrainian American had spent his summers in Kharkiv with his grandfather. He spoke the combination of Ukrainian, Russian, the dialects, everything. And all of a sudden, instead of $5,000, they had $70,000 because people were all. And that's when I came in and I was like, what do you want to do? And they're like, not diapers. I was like, well, what do you want to do? And they're like, and Mark was like, can I just tell you, I'm talking word vomit, as the kids say these days. Can I have word vomit? And I was like, do it. And he said, I'm talking to doctors and nurses and they need protective gear. And they don't want to worry about formula and diapers. They want to know how to protect themselves while they fight and while they take care of the wounded. And I said, right. So you want, so you're not trying to raise bullets, are you? And he's like, no. And I was like, we're not doing that. But I said, Russian playbook. They need flak jackets. They need helmets. They're going to come under fire and they're going to be attacked. Sure. And then what I said to them is, you need to buckle up because your life's about to fucking change. And this thing, I said, this might sound crazy to you, but only like a guileless 23-year-old could probably follow my own advice because everyone else would be like, Courtney, like, tone it down or pump the brakes, lady. But it's like, you want me to show you how it's done? You're going to listen to me? Are we not going to say please or thank you? I'm going to write something up for you in a paragraph right now. Yeah, we're doing it. Okay, let's do it right now. We did. And they started their 501(c). They changed their lives. They did incredible things. But it was from the belief of like, I know how to do this. And you're going to. I'm not going to do it for you because I can't. But I'm absolutely going to tell you at 23 is the time to do it. And so I'm not going to say plastics is your future. But I'm also not going to tell you to go earn a living or pay off your student loans. Like, I don't want people to like spend years in poverty. I do believe the youngest generation right now is coming in as the most change is happening. So they're the ones that can spend their 20s hustling and watching this all shake out.
So on that happy note, Court,
rally the troops. Rally the troops.
Somebody tell a joke.
Stay the course. Gen Z's I'm gonna give all my free time to Gen Z. I'm training 2 young folks for free to how to be on television. So when I say media strategy, it's about more like, I don't cure cancer for a living. If you want me to give you all the soft and hard skills about how to go live, I'll do that. How to speak publicly, I'll do that. How to translate tough topics, I'll do that. And if that's what earns me a living while I continue to, push forth with the cavalry to save journalism, then so be it, we'll do that.
So that was a remarkable conversation with such a brave and impressive woman. Tushar, thank you so much for introducing us to her.
My pleasure, guys. And, you just got a small taste of what I experienced for years over at Fox working with her. It was such a pleasure to learn from her more than anything else. I learned how to do my job better because of her. She pushed me to think in a more global aspect, which I think is a lot of what that job entails, right? She obviously, her bones is as a foreign correspondent, but she is a journalist in the proper sense of the word, where she is a seeker of the truth and is someone who wants to, speak truth to power. Some of the things she touched upon, which is, you have to have a bit of an adventurous spirit when you're younger to do this kind of a job. And, it was amazing to hear how so much of her upbringing was able to translate into her job. We talk about the idea of like, what's it like to be a New Yorker? And sometimes you have to have that attitude of a New Yorker to do the job anywhere in the world, right? You got to have that bit of you don't give a damn kind of attitude of what anyone thinks. And, that has really been like the hallmark of her career, where she has asked tough questions to difficult people and has found herself in situations sometimes which could be dangerous for many of us. Many of us would run away from that situation. I think, Shay, you said it a couple of times, where you would be in a situation where she's essentially sitting next to one of the most wanted men in the world in a car next to him, and you realize that this car is stopped next to you. You are now a target just as much as this guy is. Right? That's crazy.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, her career path is one that so many of us would absolutely, kill for. And she's done it with such grace. She's one of the best. I mean, I'm privileged to call her my friend, is really what I'm trying to say. Because Courtney Kealy is one of the best journalists that I know.
Yeah, there's a real toughness to her as well, right? Like, just
she's tough as nails.
Gritty, tough. I did it my way. Take no prisoners. I love how she said, like you said, T, do it when you're young, because you need that vibrancy of I don't care attitude, basically. Some of the things I took away from that remarkable conversation, I don't know, was it a bit of a bleak outlook on the future of journalism?
I think we all have that kind of attitude about, hey, what does journalism as a whole, as an industry, mean in this current day and age? Because it's not like not like it used to be, right? The newsrooms are smaller, the amount of staff is smaller, which means that you can't cover as much, which means stories fall through the cracks. So yeah, there's a certain amount of what do we do next, and how do we continue to cover the world in a proper manner?
Yeah. I mean, and if you want to look at the optimistic side of it, she said, use your voice and writing for the force of good. We need people out there. Journalism is finding the expert who really knows what's going on. So this is an adventurous career, a remarkable career, but you got to have a thick skin, I think, and you got to be a little bit tough. And she actually said, you're not doing your job unless you're a little hated. Like that's a tough gig right there, But do it while you're young and hustle, and it could be very rewarding, I'm sure.
This is probably one of the few jobs where you go out and you say to someone, you know what, not everyone likes me. And that's a good thing, right?
It's
kind of crazy.
It's true. It's true.
And I find it compelling that, she's at a point in her life now where she's able to sort of, how we talk about no wrong choices, where you learn from every experience. She's able to pull so much wisdom and so much experience forward to help others at this point as a media consultant and media analyst and whatnot. So she's really had a 360 type of career where she jumped in, she accomplished everything she was chasing after, and now she's found ways to leverage all of that and to continue to reinvent herself and to stay relevant and ahead of the curve, and to really make a difference within the industry. So I just find her story and her approach and her background to be truly remarkable. So with that, Courtney, thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of Tushar Saxena, Larry Shea, and me, Larry Samuels, thank you again for joining this episode of No Wrong Choices. If after listening you've thought of someone who could be a great guest, please let us know by sending us a note via the contact page of our website at nowrongchoices.com. While there, please be sure to check out our blog and explore other great episodes while signing up to become a member of our community. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Threads, and X. TikTok is up and content has begun rolling out. We'll be back with another episode next week. Before then, always remember, there are no wrong choices on the road to success, only opportunities, because we learn from every experience.